All right, good day, good morning, good evening, good night to you, wherever and whenever you're watching me. This is your brother and friend Maurice. And what are we talking about this time around? Well, we are continuing our study of Genesis 1. And our topic is the ordination of the sun, the moon, and the stars. You're watching the new Kosmos Videocast.
This is the new Kosmos Videocast. You've never heard it like this anywhere. Welcome.
And welcome. So we are continuing our new series of studies on the new cosmos, the new creature, the new heavens and earth. And we are seeking to understand the new heavens and earth by studying the first creation. We are seeking to study the new creation by studying the first creation, Genesis 1, the 6 days. All right. And this is our 10th video. To see the previous 9 videos, I will put the link to the playlist on the top right-hand corner of this video, or you may visit the New Kosmos Videocast channel and look in the playlist entitled New Kosmos. Now, trust me, you need to watch the previous videos because frequently folks would view one of the videos and then they would make an objection in the comments, which I already dealt with in the previous videos or in a previous video. All right. So before you make an objection in the comment, watch the previous videos. All right. They are very interesting. Not that, in my opinion, I don't think they're boring. They are very interesting. They're very eye-opening. All right. As they were for me in researching the information. Right. And as well, you can click the notification bell so that you can be notified when I release the next video in this series. So to review our last video, which we looked at the second half of day 3, which is let the vegetation appear, we saw there that the vegetation, as with the other days, the natural vegetation had a covenantal aspect to it in terms of the obedience of God's people was linked to the vegetation flourishing, and also the livestock being the vegetation. There was food for God's people and their livestock. And as long as the people were obedient to God's covenant, they would get rain, they would get favorable conditions so that their crops would be bountiful and their livestock would be fed, and they also would be well fed from the other products that they use these things to make, these fruits and crops to make. As well, when we look into the spiritual, because as we are going through these days, because of the presence of the Spirit of God, in Genesis 1 verse 2, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. We know that this account, this narrative of the 6 days, is more of has more spiritual significance. The spiritual significance of this account is more, or is the primary focus than the material account. Okay? So that in the spiritual significance of these vegetation, these fruit-bearing trees, we saw they were actually God's people. There was God's kingdom. We looked in the Psalms. The Psalms talked about God's people being fruit-bearing trees, and they have green leaves, etc. Right? We looked at Jesus understanding the kingdom of God as a vineyard, which would be taken from the stewards of his day, which were the Jews, and given to a new steward, which was the sea, the Gentiles, right? And they would render to God the fruits of that vineyard, right? We saw all of that. So if any of that is interesting to you, you need to go back and watch the previous video. All right. So what we are looking at today is Genesis 1, verses 14 to 19, which is day 4. Right? We are looking at the ordination of the sun, moon, and stars. Good? And so what we expect to see on day 4, we are expecting that no material thing will be produced, as in days 1, 2, and 3. There will be no material thing constructed, built, fabricated, put together, assembled in the sense of coming into existence from nothing. All right? In other words, we will not be seeing any ex nihilo creation happening on day 4 either. The ex nihilo creation happened way before the 6 days of Genesis 1, right? It happened way before. Everything was already in place at the time of Genesis 1, the 6 days. Good? So let's begin by reading verse 14 to 19, and we are going to take it from the New English Translation. It says there, God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be signs to indicate the seasons and days and years, and let them serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." It was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule over the day and the lesser light to rule over the night. He made the stars also. God placed the lights in the expanse of the sky to shine on the earth, to preside over the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a 4th day. Now you will say, "But Maurice, aha, aha, here you have material things coming into existence." Right? It says God made the 2 great lights. All right? Now, when you read that from a modern scientific view, yes, it does seem, I acknowledge and I admit, it does seem that, yes, God is making, meaning producing things out of nothing. These 2 great lights, putting them up in the sky. But you have a problem when you go back to day 1, right? Again, if you're reading this as a scientific documentary, right? You have a problem with day 1, because in day 1, God said, "Let there be light." There was light. God saw that the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day. So there was daylight on day 1. And then there was evening, that was sunset. The word there is Ereb. And there was morning, that is sunrise, that the Hebrew word there is boker, the 1st day. Okay? So you already had the sun in existence, giving daylight, giving sunset, and giving sunrise. You cannot have sunset without the sun. You cannot have sunrise without the sun. Okay? So when you come to day 4, right? You cannot make the Bible contradict itself. You can't make the Bible contradict itself. So when God is saying, "Let there be lights," He's giving covenant purpose. He's assigning covenant function to to the lights which were already there. He is naming and defining them as he did when he named and defined the day, named and defined the night, named and defined the rakia as the shamim, the heavens, named and defined the dry land as the eretz, named and defined the waters as the mayim or the yamim, the seas, right? Don't quote me on some of these Hebrew words, right? God was naming and defining. Now, let's and I mean, I'm not as it were trying to put down anybody, right? But I'm just reasoning with you from the scriptures, right? Because first, let's just establish some things, right? Maybe this is the first time you're watching this video in this series, because this video is part of a series of videos, right? So maybe you have not watched the previous videos. So let me just bring you up to speed in certain things, right? Because of the presence of the Holy Spirit in Genesis 1 verse 2, which let me just show you that. Genesis 1 verse 2. It says here, the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the water, right? Because of the presence of the Spirit of God in this activity that God was doing in the 6 days, it lets us know, or it should let us know, that this whole activity in the 6 days had a more spiritual emphasis and importance and significance than material. Yes, there was material stuff there, and God was transforming, naming, defining this material stuff, but he was doing so more for a spiritual purpose and a covenantal purpose, and it had spiritual significance. That's the primary focus, or should be the primary focus of Genesis 1, the 6 days. Good? And we also said that the Genesis narrative, the 6 days especially, and the 7th day, is a fusion, or was a fusion of natural, material, and spiritual. Natural and covenantal, right? It's a fusion, so that, yes, as usual, even with Jesus' teachings, Jesus used natural things. He talked about sheep, shepherd, sheepfold, all of that to talk about what? The kingdom of God, right? Which is people, right? But he's using these natural terms, which have natural meanings and definitions, but he's redefining them in covenantal context and in a spiritual, giving them spiritual significance, right? And that is not unique to Jesus, because Jesus was an Old Testament prophet. So he would have used the same kind of teaching methods that was there for centuries and millennia before him. The scriptures was written in this kind of literature. The Bible is not a science textbook, but it is an inspired ancient Near East text, as well as Genesis is, and we are focusing on Genesis, right? So when we understand that and we read Genesis like that, because that is the people who wrote Genesis under the inspiration of God's Spirit, that's how that was their worldview, and that was their perspective. And the people to who these things were read to, that was their worldview, that was their perspective. Now we are coming from, the 21st century. We don't think like they do. We were not educated like our education is different than their education. Let me put it that way. We are more scientific. We are fact-based. right? But they are more covenant-based, spirit-based, and they view things and nature and their cosmology was different to us. Right? So what you got to do now is see how they use terms and compare it with how that term was used some other parts of the Bible. And so you might get a better understanding of what was being spoken of and how what the writer or the author meant to communicate when he used certain phrases and words. Right? So that's just to, if you're viewing my video for the first time, or if you're viewing this video of the series in a vacuum, in isolation of the other videos, I just need to let you know that, right? So that in the video in this series, which was entitled The Waters Above the Heavens, and you probably need to go back and watch that if you haven't, I mentioned that the sun, moon, and stars, which are in view here in Genesis 1, verse 14. Right? Let me just put back up the Bible here. So, the sun, moon, and stars here, right? Because it talks about God made the two great lights, which will be the sun and moon, the greater light to rule over the day, the lesser light to rule over the night. He made the stars also. Sun, moon, and stars, right? But in the video that I did, which was entitled The Waters Above the Heavens, I mentioned, or I showed, that in Psalm 104 verse 19, it says that the moon was appointed. Okay, that's a covenant word. So let me just go there, right? Psalm 104, right? And we're going to go to the King James Version, because the King James Version is the one that has it. Verse 19. Okay. Look what it says. He, meaning God, appointed the moon for seasons. Good? I remember, if you haven't watched it, we saw that this word appointed is the same word asa, right? But asa in this context here is a covenant, is used in a covenant context, because the word season here is the word moedim, right? And moedim were the feast days, right? The feast days were the appointed times of the old covenant, right? The weekly, the monthly, and the yearly appointed times, especially which were mentioned in Leviticus 23. So if you go to Leviticus 23 verse 2, for example, it says, "Speak to the children of Israel, say to them concerning the feast." This word here is the moedim, which is the same word used in Genesis 1. And we go back to Genesis 1:14. Genesis 1 verse 14. Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let there be for signs and for seasons. This word seasons is moedim. Right? It doesn't mean the winter, spring, summer, and fall. It doesn't mean that. It's not talking about the climate. It's talking about the appointed times of Leviticus 23, right? So when you go back to Leviticus 23, verse 2, it's "Speak to the children of Israel, say to them concerning the moedim, the seasons of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocation. Even these are my moedim, my feasts." And again, I can show it to you in the interlinear, right? So if we go to our interlinear and we go down to verse 14, we have to do some, go way down here. Verse 14, that's 11, 12, 13, 14, right? So here we go. And said God, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to distinguish between day and night, and to mark the seasons. Now here's the word, right? Moedim. Right? Moedim. That's the word. And let's look at the word. Appointment, but let's go further. Appointed place, appointed time, meeting, appointed time, sacred season, set feast, appointed season, appointed meeting, appointed place, appointed sign, signal, tent of meeting. See, none of that is speaking about winter, spring, summer, fall. None of it. Right? It's a covenant appointed. The moon, the sun, moon, and stars are being, in Genesis 1, verse 14 and 50, they are given their covenant purpose. They are being appointed. Now, the word make, when it says, let's go back to Leviticus, Genesis 1, sorry. And we could even get back to the new English translation. When it says here in verse 16, God made, okay, that word there is asa, right? It is the same word used, the same verb used in Psalm 104, which it says, God appointed the moon. So God is here appointing two great lights. Wait, sorry. Right, so I was making the point here where it says God made two great lights. The word here, made, is asa. That's the verb. And it's the same verb in Psalm 104 verse 19, which is translated as appointed. So if something is being appointed, it's not being brought into existence. It is already there, but it's now giving a covenant function to be for designating and determining these feast days. Determine the Sabbaths, determine the weekly, the months. Well, the months were the moon, right? So the sun determines the weeks, the month determines the moon, and the sun determines the year, right? So the weekly, the monthly, and the yearly feasts of the Lord, God is appointing the sun and the moon for that purpose. Right? So, yes, when you read it from a scientific point of view, you could interpret the word made as God producing something material. But when you read it from a covenant and a spiritual point of view, which it is really intended, which was the intended meaning, because as we say, Genesis 1 verse 2, the Spirit of God was there to give spiritual meaning and covenantal purpose to the already existing creation, then that made is no longer a material creation, it's a covenant purpose being given. It's being appointed or ordained for the purpose of God's covenant with his covenant people. See, I hope you get that, right? I hope you get that. So even when we go down to let's go back to Leviticus 23, right? Notice in the New English translation, the word moedim here, seasons, is translated as appointed times. These are the Lord's appointed times. Well, how are the appointed times to be determined? By the sun, by the moon, by the stars. Okay? Which you must proclaim as holy assemblies, my appointed times. And then it tells you the appointed times. The first one was the seventh day. That was an appointed time. How do you determine the seventh day? Well, it's the seventh day of the sunrise and sunset. After you have 7 sunrises and 7 sunsets, or 7 sunsets and 7 sunrises, whichever way you look at it, then you have the 7th day. Well, after you have 6 of those, 6 sunrises and sunsets, then you have the 7th. That's the 7th day. It's determined by the sun. Then the other ones now you have, verse 4, these are the Lord's appointed times, holy assemblies which you proclaim at their appointed time in the first month, right? The word moon is Kodesh, right? The word month, is Kodesh, which means moon, right? Let me see if I can give that to you in the interlinear, right? You know, just to help you to see these things, right? So let's go to Leviticus 23 verse 5, for example. Leviticus 23 verse 5, right? It says, and on the 14th of the first month, okay? So here we have the word Chodes or Chodes, because the H there has a k to it. Any of us who have Middle Eastern friends will know that the H's is a sharp H, like a k, right? A Kodesh. So you notice that word there, Kodesh. You see there, Chodesh, or you could say Kodesh. You notice that word is the new moon, right? It's the moon. Good. So that the Kodesh, the months were determined by the moon. The Sabbath was determined by the sun, right? And then you had in these other, go back to the Bible here now, you had all of these appointed times here, the 15th day of the same month, etc., 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 right? All of these were determined by these lights in the heavens that were ruling, okay? In other words, giving direction on how to observe. So we go down to verse 37 of Leviticus 23, verse 37. It says there, these are the appointed times of the Lord that you must proclaim as holy assemblies to present a gift to the Lord, burnt offering, grain offering, etc., right? Each day according to its regulation. All of these are covenant regulation, covenant obligation, covenant specification, right? Besides the Sabbaths of the Lord, right? These were the weekly cycles of the sun. Good. And these other appointed times were the monthly cycles of the moon. And then when you have 360 cycles of the sun, then you have the year, right? So all of that. Okay, so the word asa is to, in the context of Genesis 1 verse 16, where it says God made, it is God appointing, because Psalm 104 clarifies that it's to ordain or to appoint. So God is ordaining and appointing these two great lights, sun and moon, to rule over the day, and the lesser light to rule over the night. Okay? And it's telling you that they were there for the seasons and the signs and so on. Right? To help the covenant people of God in their daily lives and activities, right? So, right? Now let's move now from the natural / covenantal into a little more spiritual covenantal now. Did you know that the covenant line of God's people, which began with Adam, well, if I want to say the first covenant line, which began with Adam and ended with Jesus, because there are two covenant lines, if you didn't know. The first covenant line began with Adam and ended with Jesus. And the second covenant line begins and never ends with Jesus. Okay? Right? But anyway, in the covenant line, because you remember when you just to prove what I'm saying, Just go and look at the genealogy of Jesus. I think it's in Matthew or Luke, one of those two genealogical lines. Jesus is traced all the way back to Adam, who was the Son of God, right? So there's that Son of God. That's a covenantal term. The Son of God covenantal line. So those people were the sun and the moon and the stars. Did you know that? All right. So let's look at Genesis 37 verse 3. Right. So we are looking at these Genesis 1, the sun, moon, and stars. Yes, natural sun, moon, and stars given covenant purpose. But also now we are moving now into like a spiritual covenantal now meaning of these sun, moon, and stars, right? So chapter 37 verse 3, Genesis 37 says, now Israel loved Joseph. So Israel here would be Jacob, okay, whose name was changed to Israel and became the father of the 12 tribes, right? Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was a son born to him late in life, and he made a special tunic for him. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated Joseph and were not able to speak to him kindly. Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. There we were binding sheaves of grain in the middle of the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose up and stood upright, and your sheaves surrounded my sheaf and bowed down to it. Then his brothers asked him, do you really think you will rule over us and have dominion over us? They hated him even more because of his dream and because what he said. Then he had another dream. Okay, so Joseph was the dreamer, right? And he told it to his brothers. Look, he said, I had another dream. The sun, now watch this now. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him, saying, what is this dream that you had? Will I, now here's the interpretation of the dream, right? I, your mother, and your brothers really come and bow down to you. So here we have the family of Israel being the sun, moon, and star. This is the line of the sons of God, because Jacob was in that covenant line of sons of God, coming all the way down from Adam through Jacob and through Judah all the way down to Jesus, right? That's the Son of God line. Okay? So you have that line being the sun, the moon, and the stars to rule over the land, which is the covenant people, the kingdom of God, right? And that line went all the way back to Adam, as I said, but it ended with Jesus, right? And then a new line now, a spiritual line, began with Jesus. Good? So the line through whom the sons of God, these sons of God were really the priests, right? Because they were the mediators between God and man. They were the ones whom God dealt with, and then they would deal with the people. So God interfaced with these sons of God, and then the sons of God interface with the people. So they were like the mediators, they were the go-betweens, right? They were between heaven and earth. In other words, they were in the expanse where the sun, moon, and stars dwelt and functioned, right? To what? To give light to the land, right? So this meant that Adam and his family were covenant sun, moon, and stars. They were to give light to the people, the land, right? However, Cain, which was one of Adam's sons, Cain was a star that fell from heaven. Did you know that? Let's look at Jude Well, Jude only has one chapter, so Jude and verses 11 to 13, right? Jude verses 11 to 13. We're talking about the sun, moon, and stars, right? Look at what Jude says. Jude verse 11. Woe to them. It's talking about false prophets, false apostles, right? It says, woe to them, these false prophets and false apostles. For they have traveled down Cain's path. So Cain is being brought to view, right? You know, Cain, Adam's son. Good? The son who killed Abel. So Cain was the bad son. And what happened to Cain? When he killed Abel, he was cast out of the land. Right? He was cast out of the land of Eden. He went to live in Nod. Good? So he was cast out of what? Heaven, right? So hold on a second. Let's continue to read. They have traveled down Cain's path. So what is Cain's path? Because of greed, they have abandoned themselves to Balaam's error. Hence they will certainly perish in Korah's rebellion. So all of these, Balaam was a rebellious prophet. Korah was a rebellious leader, right? So Cain also was in rebellion, right? So rebellion is the theme there. These men are dangerous reefs at your love feast, feasting without reverence, feeding themselves. They are waterless clouds, all right, carried along by the winds. Where do clouds dwell? In the heavens, right? The clouds are from the heavens, right? Trees without fruit. So look, men are trees, men are clouds. Okay? But look at verse 13. Wild sea waves. So men are waves, spewing out the foam of their shame. Wayward stars. Aha! So Cain was a wayward star. He fell from heaven, right? He was one of the stars. He was one of the sun, moon, and stars functioning in the covenant heavens, so to speak, because they were the ones whom God was interfacing with, and then they were now to interface with the rest of humanity. Good? That's why they were to reign over the land. Okay? So Cain was a star that fell from heaven. Right? Notice it was understood that the house of Israel, going back to Joseph telling his brothers the dream, and Jacob/Israel understanding the sun, moon, and stars, meaning his family, his household, the house of Israel, right? Notice it was understood that the house of Israel were the covenant sun, moon, and stars, inheriting that line from Adam, right? So they were the ones that rightfully ruled over the covenant land as God's lights from the covenant heavens, right? We'll continue to study these covenant sun, moon, and stars when I come back. All right, so we are looking at the covenant and spiritual significance of the sun, moon, and stars, which were mentioned in Genesis 1, 14, 15. The sun, moon, and stars which God appointed to give light on the land, to determine the seasons, the moedim, which were the appointed times, and give the signs and so on, right? These are covenant appointments. That was for the natural lights in the heavens, but also we have now the covenant lights, the spiritual lights, which were his leaders, his priests, the sons of God. They were also the sun, moon, and stars. They ruled over the covenant people, right? As God's lights from the heavens, like Moses, for example, right? So out of this line, we had the Levites, who would minister in the temple, right? And the temple, as you will learn later on, I have a study coming up, which would show you how the temple was designed in the structure of the heaven, the earth, the heavens, plural, heavens, earth, and sea. And the heavens, plural, because there was the heavens being the presence of God, the abode of God, which was depicted by the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. Then there was a second apartment called, and a second and bigger apartment called the Holy Place, which was where the priest ministered. That realm there was the second heaven, right? That was the heaven where the priest, the stars, the sun, the moon, the stars, that's where they ministered. And then you had the earth, which was the courtyard where you had the people coming to bring their sacrifices and offerings and so on. And there was a bowl, a big brass bowl they called the seas, which you remember in Genesis 1 were gathered into one place. Okay, so the seas were in that bowl. That represented the tiny amount of Gentiles who at that time were joined to the Lord through that first covenant, right? So the Levites would minister in the temple. They would minister in the heavens. So, for example, just to show you the Levites there, Numbers 150, for example, to show you the Levites were the one chosen to minister in the temple, the things concerning the tabernacle and the sanctuary. Numbers 1 verse 50, it says there, it says, but appoint, you notice the word appoint there? So here's a light, here the lights of the heavens are being appointed. Right? Here the sun, moon, and stars are being appointed. But appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, right? So this is the Moses tabernacle of the wilderness. Over all its furnishings, etc., they must carry the tabernacle, etc., right? So they were the ones who, anything concerning the tabernacle, anything concerning the old covenant sanctuary, anyone who, all who had to minister in that sanctuary must come from the line of the Levites. And Levi was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, one of the 12 sons of Israel, right? So, yes, Levites were in the line of the sons of God. Then out of that line of Levi now, you would have Aaron, because Aaron and Moses were sons of Levi, okay? And Aaron and Moses functioned as high priests because they were, if you remember, Moses was the one who went up into the cloud on the top of the mountain to speak with God, to get the 10 Commandments and so on. And then when the tabernacle was built and the cloud now would form in the tabernacle, Moses was the one who went into the inner room, or the most holy place of the tabernacle, to commune with God. When God would manifest, when the presence of God would manifest over the Ark of the Covenant, right, over the mercy seat. So Moses was a high priest. Aaron also was a high priest. And they were functioning now in the heavens. They were functioning, the high priest was entering into the presence of God in the heaven of the sanctuary, because that's where God manifested his presence. And then the regular priests, they function in the heavens of the priest, right? The heavens of the priesthood as the lights. Okay? So now look at the priest now functioning as the sun, moon, and stars. I'm going to give you a demonstration of it now. So look at Nehemiah. So we're going to go to Nehemiah. All right, Nehemiah 8. Nehemiah 8, reading from verse 7. Right? So remember in Genesis 1, God appointed the lights to what? To give the seasons, the moedim. And what did we find the moedim were? The appointed times of the Old Covenant worship, right? The weekly, the monthly, the yearly appointed times, right? Look at now the Levites doing exactly that, right? So we have some names here. We're going to skip all of them, and we're going to start here. All of whom were Levites. Okay, so we know this is the priesthood, right? Were teaching, giving light, the people the law, right? So that was their source of light, the law, right? As the people remained standing. So the priests here are the lights in the heavens, shining the light of the law on the people on the earth, right? That's what you're seeing if you're looking at it spiritually. It says they read from the book of God's law, that's the Torah, explaining it and imparting insight, that is, giving light to the people. Thus the people gained what? Understanding. They were enlightened from what was read. You see that? You see how the priests were to enlighten the people? So the priests, the Levites, functioned as the lights in the heavens. They were appointed by God to give light. Now, let's continue. Let's go down to verse 13 now. We're going to see them now giving the moedim, the seasons, right? Verse 13. And on the second day of the month, the family leaders met with Ezra the scribe together with all the people and the what? The priests and the Levites. Okay, so here we have the lights in the heavens. To consider the words of the law. They discovered written in the law that the Lord had commanded through Moses that the Israelites should live in temporary shelters during the festival of the seventh month. The festival of the seventh month is the feast, the moedim of tabernacles. Right? That's the moedim, the season of tabernacles. Right? So they were now to, in verse 15 now, look what they said. And that they should make a proclamation and disseminate this message. So you know what? They're going to spread the light now from the law in all the cities in Jerusalem. Go to the hill country and bring back olive branches and branches of wild olive trees, myrtle trees, date palms, other leafy trees to construct temporary shelters, as it is written. As it is written where? As it is written in the law. As it's written in Leviticus 23, which talks about how to observe the feast or the season or the moedim of tabernacles. All right? But when Israel went into covenant apostasy now, the sun and the moon and the stars were removed. Right? So when you read in the Bible now, and you read certain parts of the Bible where it says, oh, the sun and the moon would not give light, and the sun would turn into blood, and the sun would become dark, and the moon would turn to blood, and the stars would fall from the sky. Understand what it's talking about. It's talking about the priesthood. Okay? So let's look at Jesus, for example. Mark chapter 13, verse 24. Okay? Mark 13, 24. Look at this. Look what Jesus says. When Jesus was talking now about all the signs and all the events leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple at Jerusalem, which at that time that would probably be in the year 2930, somewhere around that time Jesus was saying this, but it came to pass in the year 70, right? So Jesus was prophesying with these things would happen leading up to that destruction. Look what he said would happen. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun would be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from the heaven, and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Do you now think, based on all that I have shared with you concerning the sun, moon, and stars, that Joseph understood that the leaders, well, first of all, the line of the sons of God of Israel were the sun, moon, and stars. Then as we narrowed it down now to the priesthood, who are really functioning in that heavens between the heaven of God in the most holy place and the earth, meaning the people who worship God. And the priesthood was between, they were in the firmament, in the rakia then between that, giving the light of the seasons to the people. Which you think was more likely Jesus talking about here? Because at the destruction of Jerusalem and at the destruction of his temple, all the priesthood was destroyed. And even before that destruction happened, during the civil war, the priesthood was corrupted. And even before that, civil war, there was serious problems with the priesthood still. Because remember, Jesus constantly upbraided them. Jesus constantly rebuked them and called them whitewashed sepulchres. He called them serpents. He called them vipers. He said that they were making the law of God void. Right? So there were serious problems with the sun, moon, and stars. And by the time of the year 70, when that whole system was destroyed, Jesus said, your sun will be dark, your moon wouldn't be given light, and your stars would have fallen from heaven. He was talking about the priesthood. Jesus' problem throughout the Gospels was the leaders, not necessarily the ordinary people. His problem were always the leaders, the priests, the high priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the family of the priests. These were the people he had a problem with. The lights in the heavens of Israel. These were the people he had a problem with. Right? Let's continue reading. Then everyone will see the Son of Man arriving in the clouds with great power and glory. Remember when we talked about the cloud language? When Isaiah was talking about the judgment which came to Babylon. Or was it Egypt? Where the Lord would ride on the clouds. Judgment coming to that city in the form of an enemy army. Riding when the enemy's armies in those days, when the land was so flat and so dry that when an army was coming up over the horizon, the first thing you saw was this great cloud of dust. And you know trouble coming. Right? That's the context of the cloud coming. Right? And then they have the clouds of heavens, which have another context. Right? Which I wouldn't get into right now. Okay? Because I don't want to throw us off of what we're talking about here. Right? Let's move down to verse 29. But that cloud here, that's a judgment language. Right? So you'd have the leadership, the priesthood being judged. Right? They're falling from heaven. The lights went out because they are being judged. Matthew 23, read about the judgment that Jesus pronounced. This judgment came to pass in the year 70, and in the year 70, you had these lights falling. Right? The Son of Man arriving on the clouds, judgment, right? Come down to verse 29. So as long as you stick with this ministry, I'm going to bring all these studies for you. Right? But if you want all of this, if you want to learn everything one time, you can purchase the book, Everything is Temple. All of this is in that book, right? If you don't want to purchase the book, just continue watching. I'm going to bring it. The study's going to come eventually, right? So, listen to what Jesus said now in verse 29. So also you, when you see these things happening, what things? The sun getting dark, the moon giving light, the stars falling from heaven. You think that is natural? No, none of that happened anytime from when Christ said it to the destruction of Jerusalem. You didn't have physical stars falling. You didn't have the physical sun and the moon dying out, right? But what you did have is the destruction of the priesthood. That's what you did have that. And we know that the priesthood were the lights for Israel, right? So he said, when you see those things happening, know that he is near. Know that the return of Christ is near at the door at that time. We've been looking forward for this. Okay, so he said, I tell you the truth, this generation, which generation? The generation to whom he was speaking. He says that generation will not pass away until these things take place, right? So, again, go back to the generation that Jesus spoke to and see if you ever had the sun when going dark. See if you had the moon not giving light. See if you had the stars falling from the skies. You didn't have that, right? So, and obviously Jesus wasn't talking about these material lights in the heavens. He was talking about the covenant lights, the priesthood of the sons of God, of the line that went back to Adam, right? The Levites of Israel, the sons of Aaron. These were the sun, moon, and stars that it was talking about, right? And so he told them clearly, in that generation whom he was speaking to, the heaven and the earth will pass away, right? So again, we had the heaven represented by the temple, the most holy place, heaven of God. The holy place, heaven of the priesthood. The earth, the people of God, Israel, right? That passed away. Hasn't it passed away? Do we still have Jerusalem temple? No. Do we have an Israel, natural Israel as the people of God? No. What do we have? We have a spiritual heavens and a spiritual earth, a spiritual temple today. The kingdom of heaven, which is also known as the church, the people of God. Right? We are functioning in a new heavens and earth under a new Adam, which is Christ. Right? That's what these things mean. Right? But you see, the modern church today, they view everything as a scientific. They view the Bible as a scientific book. So they interpret it in a scientific way. So they are looking for, we're waiting to see when the physical sun goes out and the physical moon goes out and physical stars drop on the earth from the heavens. But I don't know. You will wait long for that. Right? You will wait long for that. But understand how that is such a deception, that these things have already happened, and because we have refused to understand Christ in the language he was using and in the context he was speaking to the people whom he was ministering to, and that generation which he was sent to, we have ignored all of that and seek to pull Christ out of context and place him into our 21st century as speaking to us, so telling we are the final generation who will see the Lord coming on the clouds, and the physical sun and the physical moon and the physical stars will be destroyed, and the physical earth will be destroyed. Right? That is so far from what Christ was saying. Right? Look at Hosea chapter 2, and we're going to wrap up with this one, right? We're going to wrap up with this text. Hosea chapter 2. Hosea chapter 2, verse 11. Right? Hosea was an Old Testament prophet. Look what Hosea said as a result of Israel not keeping her covenant obligation in terms of what will happen to the moedim, the seasons, right? It says, this is what the Lord says, I will put an end to her celebrations, her annual religious festivals, monthly new moon celebrations, weekly Sabbath festivities, all her appointed festivals. I will destroy her vines and fig trees, about which she said, these are my wages for prostitution that my lovers gave me. I will turn her cultivated vines, fig trees, into an uncultivated thicket, so that wild animals would devour them. All of this happened because today, God's kingdom people do not have monthly new moon, annual religious, now weekly Sabbath festivals. All of that was brought to an end. And the vines and the fig trees, means the old covenant people, they no longer exist because that covenant was ended. The new covenant now has remained. Right? The new covenant has remained. The second Adam, which is Christ, is the Adam of this new creation. Right? That's the Adam of this new creation, Christ. Okay? So understand, when you go back to Genesis 1, 14 day 4, when the narrative talks about God made two great lights to rule, the word made, asa, should be understood in the context of appointed. Why? Because the natural sun was already there. You read that from day one. Right? If you're going to insist that he made the sun, the moon, and the stars on day 4, you're creating problems for day 1, day 2, and day 3, which clearly tells you there was daylight, there was sunset, and there was sunrise happening. Okay? Because why would you read it like that? Because you're reading it from a scientific perspective. But if you read it from the spiritual and covenantal perspective, there is no problem. You can see that the sun and the moon and the stars are being appointed and ordained for the covenant purpose of determining the moedim, the seasons and the signs that God's covenant people were to observe. So when we ask the question on day 4 of Genesis 1, I keep saying Genesis 6. On day 4 of Genesis 1, was anything material produced, constructed, built, fabricated, put together, assembled? No. The sun, the moon, the stars had already been there, as evidenced by the sun setting and rising since day 1, day 2, and day 3. God instead gave names and covenant purpose to these lights in the celestial heavens. And there was no ex nihilo production of stuff. But more importantly, the sun, moon, and stars, the appointing of the sun, moon, and stars was for covenant purpose. And we also saw the appointing of the priesthood. The priesthood was the sun, moon, and stars who enlightened, who illuminated Israel from the law, right? And taught them about the weekly, monthly, and yearly feasts. Leviticus 23, the Passover, the Sabbath day, the Day of Atonement, the Day of Tabernacles, the Feast of Trumpet, when the month starts. All of these were appointed times of the law. And the priest over Israel were the spiritual sun, moon, and stars, as Joseph in his dream and as of the sun, moon, and stars was interpreted by Israel as the house of Israel, the sun, moon, and stars. Out of that sun, moon, and stars, you have the Levites coming. And the Levites were appointed to give the light to the people of Israel from the priesthood of the temple, the heavens of the temple, right? So we have come to the end of this study, which was entitled The Ordination of the Sun, Moon, and the Stars. And next study, we will look at day 5 in our study of the new cosmos. So if you appreciate this content, please like, please share, and subscribe. You may support the ministry by giving or purchasing one or all of my books, or by making a purchase from the merchandise store. The links to these are in the description. I will also put them in the first comment. So until next time, I'm your friend Murray saying, may God richly bless you.
This has been the new Kosmos Videocast. Remember to comment, like, subscribe, and share.